All right, welcome back to Adobe Lightroom Classic. And today we're going to take a look at the rest of the options in the selective adjustments. And then we're also going to take a quick look here at flow and density on the brush adjustments. So the first two are pretty easy. We've got size, which is increasing the size of your brush. We talked about feather. Feather is the changing of the edge. So how fast you want to go from 100% of adjustment to 0. So a small feather is going to give you a harder adjustment. And when is that helpful? Well, when you're trying to make a really small and accurate adjustment, and I'm not going to zoom in here and try to really get it up right up against this sheep, right? So it's very accurate. That's when you want to use a small brush and a small feather. However, as you increase your feather, you're going to have lower transition from 100% to 0%. That's where most of your adjustments are, and they're going to be your larger adjustments when you kind of come in here and just rough stuff in. So usually I'm up around 50 to 60% for most of my adjustments. I don't use 100. It really seems to be almost too much of a feather and it bleeds over. So I usually set my feather somewhere around 50 to 60, and then I'll lower it if I'm trying to make a more accurate selection. And you'll see that after we kind of go through the program, I'm going to show you when, where, and how you should actually be using the tools. It's one thing to understand how to use them, but then it's a different thing to how, when, what should you do, why should you do it then. We're all going to go into that, and that's going to be new in the series, something that I've never done before. So the first thing that we're going to take a look at is density. And think of density as like an opacity setting. If I use my flow and my density at 100% and I make an adjustment, we're going to get that white. If we paint white into a mask, we see up here, when we make the adjustment, we're going to get 100% of it where it's white. If we take our density and we lower it to 50%, and then we make a mark, I can go over this as many times as I want, it's still always going to be at 50%. No matter what I do to it, it's going to be 50%. In this location, when we make an adjustment, it's going to be 100%. In this location, it's going to be 50%. So what that will allow you to do, and I'll just do this so you can see this, here we're getting 100%, here we're getting 50%. So if you have a situation where in this area it needs to be brighter, and this area would need to be darker, you can change your density to make it affect one area more and one area less, depending on how much or little you want. And you can slide this anywhere you want. You could come way down here and we could do the same thing, and it would just add a little bit of that exposure brightness because we're not using it at 100%. So we're going to go ahead and reset that. We're going to click on brush. We're going to take our density back up. Flow is different. So if you have 100% flow and you make a mark just like before, you're going to get 100%. But flow is more interesting because you can build it up over time. And so I'm going to lower this pretty low so you can see what's going on. So if I make one swipe here, that's giving us 9%. If I come here and I do it twice, that's giving us more. And then if we come over here and I do it 4 times, it's building it up. Do it some more times, it builds up and lets us build up. So we can essentially build a transition where we just have a little bit up here and then there, and then down here we have more of an area. When we make our adjustment, it's going to gradate almost like a linear gradient, but it allows us to build up over time. So what you can do in a situation like that is I'm actually going to reset this, and I'm going to click my brush, and we've got our flow way down low. And you can do both flow and density and lower them if you'd like. So we're going to make an adjustment, and I'm going to bump my exposure up. And so every time that I go over this animal, it's going to make it brighter. So if I want his head really bright, and I just want his body to be brightened but not as much, I can go over it more. And then if we come back here and look at this thing, you can see this area in here is brighter than this area. So we're getting more effect here than here. So flow, actually, I prefer better because it allows me to build up over time. So each time that I brush over it, it's going to get brighter and brighter and add more of this adjustment to that location. Understanding and knowing how to use flow and density are important. Now, what you saw me just do is I moved that back to 100%. Eventually, you're going to come to another image. You're going to grab your brush. And if you forget to adjust your flow, you're going to go over it and say, hey, nothing's happening. Well, something's happening. It's just you've got your flow super low. So you're going to need to boost your flow up. So when you go over that flow or next to it, it's going to make that white line versus that light gray. If something is happening and it looks weird and it's not doing what you expect, a lot of times it's because your flow or your density is super low. So over here we have an invert, and this is just inverting your mask, making what's white black and what's black white. You can turn that on or off. We will switch on back over to the sheep. So the next effect we're going to take a look at is linear gradient. So down here we have our linear gradient. You will notice that over here, M is its quick key. I'm going to click on linear gradient. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's like making a gradient. So if I drag this down, notice we're going from white to black, and we've got this smooth total gradation. So we're going to get more adjustment up here and less over here. We could also rotate that, and I'll do it in a second. So I can come in here and I can brighten this, and you can see it's brightening this area more than this area. Well, what happens if we want the opposite? Well, it's really easy. You can come down here and you can rotate that around, and you can adjust that to wherever you want it to be. So I can drag this up here. And now in this case, it's giving me less adjustment up here and more down here. Obviously, this is way too much. So we can drag that down, and it's giving us a gradient here, which would make more sense that this area of the sky would be brighter. And just like anything else, if we want to do a gradient on the sky, but we didn't want it to affect here, we can just paint this area out. To paint that out, we'll come up, click on the mask. We're going to hit subtract. We're going to use the brush. I'm going to make my brush big, and we're just going to go ahead and paint that out. Hopefully I got all that. And so now you can see in the mask, we're having a gradient, but only down to the top of the mountains. So that's how you use linear gradient. We'll reset that. All right, next up after linear gradient is going to be right over here. We have radial gradient. Shift M is its quick key. And radial gradient is just like linear gradient, except for it's in a radial pattern, but it's still using a gradient. So all you need to do is click on radial gradient, come over here, and then you can draw. And you can see you can do an ellipse to a circle or whatever you want. And so this is going to be your feather. And when you work on these, you can move these in and out to change your feather. So right over here, notice we've got some feather. We can adjust that any which way we want. So if we move this way, it's going to have a greater feather. And if we move it inside, we're going to have less of a feather, so it's more accurate. You can add and subtract just like you could before. And then once you come in here and you make an adjustment, it's going to be applied to that location. So that's a radial gradient. Let you do it in a specific area. So let's go ahead and see if we can find an image. Click on this woman right here, and I'll do right under her head. And you could use a brush for this just as well. Truthfully, that's probably what I would actually use, but we'll go ahead and click on radial gradient. Come in here and we will draw a spot. I actually prefer to see the overlay so I can see what I'm doing. Just in just a little bit so there's no spillover. Then we'll come over here and make our adjustment. You can see that's happening just in that area. It looks like it's not getting fully affected right here. And that's where you would hit add, and then you would go to brush. In this case, this is when I would use a little less feather because I want to be more accurate. We're going to make that smaller, and we can come in here and we can add to get all the way to the edge of that hat if you wanted to do. And that's probably why I'd use the brush anyways instead of the radial gradient, just because I think it's going to be more accurate than sitting there trying to draw that. But that's what it does, and that's how you use it. So let's go ahead and hit reset. Down here, we have color range. So let's find something with color. All right, our next option is going to be select by color range. So we have this little bird because we got some yellow. And if I click on color range and I come over here and I sample the bird, you'll see it's selecting just this area where it's white. It didn't select out here in this area because this is a darker color that we see right here. Now, if we want to try to add some more, we can slide this little refine brush so we can make it less sensitive or more sensitive to that specific color. We could also add, so I can hit add by color range. And then what I could do is I can come out here and try to select this color as well. And so now we're selecting this color and this color. And when I say show overlay, we can see the area that's getting affected. Now it is picking up a little bit of the yellow here. And if I want to remove that, just like anything else, I can hit subtract, brush, and we'll just take that brush and paint that out. And now when we make our adjustment, you can see it's only affecting that area. Now, obviously that doesn't look good, but that's an easy way for you to see what it's doing in this case. So if I wanted to add a little vibrance or saturation to the image, I could come down here and super saturate that image. And I could do basically anything that I wanted to that specific area. And that is select by color range. I just like to take a moment to say the YouTube algorithm really likes it when you watch the whole video, you like the video, and you comment on the video. If you're finding the information in any of these videos helpful, if you could please give me a thumbs up, that would be wonderful. If you would like to subscribe and get future videos as they come up, because I'm going to be doing a whole series on Lightroom right here, that would be great as well. The last thing that we have here is going to be select by Luminance Range. And we're going to click on this image here. I'm going to hit reset just to make sure nothing's going on. I'm going to click this and we're going to come down here to Luminance Range. And this is just brightness. So what I'm going to do, and the reason I picked this image is to try to select the white behind all these little leaves would be really difficult if you tried to do it manually. But if I come in here and I click, it's picking the Luminance Range and it's picking it everywhere. So it's picking it here, 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 anything that's that color. Just like before, we have these sliders that we can slide and adjust that luminance range with these sliders here. We can invert that to make it the opposite of what we wanted. And then once we have that, we can come in here and I can adjust the highlights. So I can adjust the highlights in that image and it's just affecting those highlights area. In this case of this image, I don't really think we need to adjust any of those areas. Let's say that I just wanted to warm this grass up. I think that's maybe a better option. We can come and it's just warming that area up just a little bit. And so that is select by Luminance Range, and that can be super helpful. And just like before, we can add and subtract to the location. So if I picked it, but I didn't want it to apply up here, I could just paint black and paint that out of that location. So this lapse option, which is called depth range, is not going to be very helpful if you're shooting with most DSLRs or mirrorless cameras because they don't have that depth information in it. If you have something like an iPhone, which does have depth applied to it, and that's kind of how you can adjust and blur the backgrounds and stuff like that in any image, that has a depth mask. One thing you need to make sure of is that your file is an HEIC because that's the type of file that has that depth in it. And then if you import it into Lightroom, it's going to have that depth range mask and you're going to be able to adjust stuff. I don't find this realistic because I never take photos with an iPhone. They look great on a phone, but iPhones are not the best cameras in the world. Well, that's it for this video. In the next video, I'll come over here and I'll show you how to use some presets. And I will also go over into the library and show you how to use the collections as well.